and burdened, his baseball cap pulled low over his face. Lisa was finishing her shift when she noticed something. The man had accidentally left his wallet behind under his booth. Without hesitation, she grabbed it and rushed outside, determined to return it to him before he disappeared into the night. Where are you watching from? Kindly let us know in the comments section, or you can please complete our 1,000 subscribers. Let's continue. Sir, you forgot this, she called out as she jogged toward him, catching him just as he was unlocking the door of a simple black sedan. Keanu turned, startled, and for a moment, Lisa caught a flicker of emotions in his expression: relief, gratitude, and something she couldn't quite identify. Thank you, he said softly, before pausing and asking, You didn't look inside, did you? Lisa shook her head, a little confused. Why would I? She replied with a small laugh. The brief interaction left Lisa feeling good about doing the right thing, but the next morning, everything unraveled. Some of her co-workers, who had seen the exchange, informed their manager about it. Instead of praising Lisa for her honesty, her manager was furious. Why did you step outside during your shift for some random customer? He demanded, his tone sharp and unyielding. Lisa tried to explain, but he cut her off. That kind of behavior is unacceptable here. I'm sorry, but you're fired. The words hit her like a thunderbolt. Shocked and devastated, Lisa tried to plead her case, her voice trembling with emotion. Please, sir, I was just trying to do the right thing, but her manager wouldn't budge. Whether it was pride, resentment, or something deeper fueling his anger, he refused to listen. With tears streaming down her face, Lisa gathered her belongings into a small box, her heart heavy as she left the diner for the last time. The morning after her firing, Lisa sat in her cramped apartment, staring at the peeling wallpaper and wondering how she'd survive. Rent was due in days, and her meager savings were vanishing fast. She replayed the events at the diner over and over in her head, questioning if helping that man Keanu Reeves had been worth losing her job. Hours passed as her thoughts swirled in a storm of doubt and fear. Then, as if the universe had timed it perfectly, her worn-out television flickered to life with breaking news. Lisa wasn't prepared for what she was about to hear. Keanu Reeves, known around the globe for his humility and generosity, was speaking in an interview. But this time, it wasn't about a movie or some Hollywood scandal. It was a heartfelt message, one that immediately captured her attention. There was a moment recently, Keanu began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, that reminded me why kindness mattered. Someone showed me compassion at a time when I needed it most, when I felt like I was falling apart. Lisa leaned forward, her heart racing. Could this be about? She didn't treat me like a celebrity, Keanu continued, a faint smile crossing his face. She treated me like a person, and that meant everything. Lisa's breath hitched as he spoke. It was unmistakable he was talking about her. Her name was even mentioned briefly, but what he said next left her frozen in disbelief. Keanu's voice softened, and for a moment, his vulnerability shone through. I'd just come from visiting someone I loved deeply, someone I lost. I wasn't sure I could keep going that night. And then this stranger, this woman, went out of her way to help me. Not for recognition, not for reward, but just because she cared. Tears slid down Lisa's cheeks as she clutched the blanket draped over her shoulders. She hadn't known he was struggling that night. To her, it had just been a simple act of decency. In that moment, Keanu said, pausing to collect his thoughts, I realized something. Even when life feels unbearable, it's those small, selfless gestures that remind us to keep going. She didn't ask for anything. She just saw someone who needed help. Lisa sank back into her threadbare couch, overwhelmed. The weight of her job loss, her fears about the future, they all momentarily faded. But before she could fully process what she'd heard, Keanu added something that left her stunned. I don't know her name, he said, looking directly at the camera with a determined expression. But if she's out there, I want to say thank you. And if there's any way I can repay her kindness, I'll do everything in my power to make it happen. Lisa's phone buzzed, jolting her from her thoughts. It was a text from her best friend, Lydia. Lisa, isn't this about you? You're on the news. Her hands trembled as she held the phone, reality crashing down around her. That one act of kindness, something she'd thought so little of, had now become something much bigger than she could have ever imagined. But as her name spread like wildfire, a new wave of anxiety crept in. What would happen next? Keanu Reeves was looking for her. Lisa couldn't stop thinking about it. What would she even say if he found her? Would he see her differently now that she was broke, without a job, and struggling to keep her life together? The next morning, Lisa stepped outside into the crisp Los Angeles air, her thrift store coat wrapped tightly around her. She needed to clear her mind, to escape the overwhelming thoughts that had consumed her since Keanu's public acknowledgement. As she walked down the street, lost in her thoughts, she didn't notice the sleek black sedan that had just parked at the curb. "Excuse me," came a familiar, gentle voice. Lisa froze, her heart skipping a beat. She turned slowly and was met with the last person she expected to see, Keanu Reeves. His eyes softened as recognition sparked in his gaze. "It's you," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Keanu offered her a small, warm smile, the same kindness she remembered from their brief encounter. "I've been looking for you." And just like that, the world seemed to shift. This wasn't about fame or gratitude or charity. It was two strangers, standing in the cold, connected by an unspoken bond neither of them could quite understand, but both of them felt deeply. Lisa finally found her voice, though it trembled. I don't think you'd remember me. How could I forget?" Keanu replied, his words heavy with sincerity. "You reminded me of something I thought I had lost. And now," he paused, as if deciding how much to reveal, "I'd like to return the favor." Before Lisa could say anything, her phone buzzed. A notification from her landlord. The rent was overdue, and an eviction notice was on its way. Panic gripped her, but she quickly masked it, not wanting to let Keanu see her weakness. What she didn't realize was that he had already noticed. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle, his dark eyes filled with concern. Lisa forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine," she lied. But the tears were already welling up, and she couldn't hold them back for much longer. Then, Keanu did something that left her completely speechless. Keanu's gaze didn't waver, his concern cutting through Lisa's weak attempt to hide her emotions. He tilted his head slightly, as if trying to read the truth beneath her expression. Before Lisa could speak, he gently said, "You don't have to tell me what's wrong, but I can see the weight of everything on you." The words hit her harder than she expected. She shook her head quickly, fighting the tears that were threatening to spill. "It's nothing," she whispered, her voice trembling. But Keanu didn't let her off that easily. His hand hovered for a moment before he slowly reached out, unsure if it was okay. When Lisa didn't flinch, he placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "Lisa," he said softly. The way he said her name, with such warmth and care, broke her completely. The tears came fast now, hot and unstoppable. "I lost my job," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I can't pay my rent. I don't know what I'm going to do." She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling more exposed than she ever had before. Keanu's expression shifted. It wasn't pity. It was something deeper, a kind of understanding that made Lisa feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. "Since you were fired, and because of what you did for me, right?" he asked gently. Lisa nodded reluctantly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "It doesn't matter, I'll figure it out." But Keanu wasn't having it. He stepped closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "It does matter. You didn't deserve that. You helped someone when you didn't have to. The world needs more people like you. Let me help." Lisa shook her head quickly. "No, I can't let you. You didn't hesitate to help me. You even recovered my lost wallet." Keanu interrupted, his tone firm but kind. "You didn't ask for anything. Let me return the favor." Before Lisa could protest again, Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He held it out to her. When she hesitated, he smiled gently. "Just take it." Lisa slowly unfolded the paper in her trembling hands, her breath catching as she realized what it was. A check. But not just any check. The amount written on it was more money than she had ever seen in her entire life. Her hands shook as she looked up at Keanu, her voice barely audible. I can't accept this. It's too much. Keanu's smile turned bittersweet, his eyes soft but unwavering. It's not about the money, Lisa. It's about what you did for me. You gave me something I hadn't felt in years. Shope. His voice grew quieter, more earnest. This is my way of saying thank you. Lisa stared at him, gratitude and disbelief swirling in her chest. I don't know what to say, she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. You don't have to say anything, Keanu replied gently. Just promise me one thing. Her voice cracked as she asked. What's that? Don't let the world take your kindness away. His gaze locked with hers, steady and sincere. It's rare, and it's powerful. Don't lose it. For the first time in days, Lisa felt a flicker of hope break through the weight of her despair. But before she could respond, Keanu's expression shifted, growing more somber. He hesitated, his hands falling to his sides. There's something else, he said quietly, his voice tinged with vulnerability. Something I didn't tell you that night. Lisa frowned, her heart pounding at the sudden change in his demeanor. What is it? She asked softly. Keanu's voice dropped lower, calm but heavy with emotion. That night, I had just come from the hospital. He paused, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. My sister, she's fighting cancer. Lisa's breath hitched as she saw the raw pain etched into his face. He hesitated, then continued. I didn't know if she was going to make it. I felt so lost. Without thinking, Lisa reached out, her hand brushing against his arm in a comforting gesture. I'm so sorry, she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. Keanu gave her a small, sad smile. You didn't just return my wallet that night. You reminded me that even in the darkest moments, there's still light. And now, he paused, his voice steady but full of meaning. I want to be that light for you. Lisa's tears streamed down her face as Keanu's words sank in. This wasn't about charity, it was about something deep. Two people, strangers just days ago, had unknowingly saved each other in ways neither could fully comprehend. And there, amidst the cold, bustling streets of Los Angeles, they both felt something. It wasn't just a fleeting moment. It was a bond forged through shared pain and quiet kindness. But life rarely allows moments like this to linger. Keanu opened his mouth, as if to say something more, but then his phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. With a sigh, he slipped the phone back into his coat. I have to go, he said reluctantly, his voice tinged with regret. He hesitated before looking into Lisa's eyes. But this isn't the end, Lisa. I promise. Before she could respond, Keanu gently squeezed her shoulder, offering one last comforting smile before turning and disappearing into the crowd. Lisa stood frozen on the sidewalk, clutching the check in her trembling hands. Her heart swirled with gratitude, confusion, and something unspoken, a connection to this man whose life felt so distant from her. As she stared after him, the city buzzed around her, indifferent to the extraordinary moment she'd just experienced. This can't be real, she whispered, her breath visible in the frosty air. But it was real. That evening, Lisa returned to her small, cluttered apartment. The check still felt heavy in her hand as she placed it carefully on the kitchen counter. She sat at the wobbly table, staring at it as if it might vanish. The amount was staggering enough to pull her out of the downward spiral yet, for reasons she couldn't explain, she hesitated. It felt like too much, too fast, like accepting it might somehow cheapen the connection they'd share. Her phone buzzed on the table, jolting her from her thoughts. It was another text from Lydia. Lisa, you need to see this now. Curiosity and unease stirred in her chest as she clicked the link Lydia had sent. It opened to a video of Keanu standing outside a hospital, speaking to a group of reporters. Lisa's breath caught as she took in his somber yet determined expression. She's my rock, Keanu said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. My sister has always been the strongest person I know. While she's fighting this battle, I've come to realize how important it is to have people who remind us to keep going. He paused, his gaze dropping for a moment before continuing. There's someone out there who reminded me of that someone I hope knows how much they've done for me. Lisa's chest tightened as the camera panned to the background, where a frail woman was being helped into the hospital by a nurse. Keanu's sister. Despite her pale complexion and the visible toll of her illness, the woman radiated warmth, her kind smile lighting up the frame. Tears spilled down Lisa's cheeks as she watched. The weight of Keanu's burden became startlingly clear. This wasn't just a man with fame and fortune offering her help. This was someone who was carrying more pain than she could have imagined. And yet, even as his own world wavered under the weight of his sister's illness, he had taken the time to look for her, to thank her, to offer her a lifeline. Lisa's gaze shifted to the check on her counter. Her heart felt torn. She wasn't sure what her next step would be, but one thing was certain. Keanu Reeves had shown her that even in the midst of life's darkest moments, kindness could still create a ripple that changed everything. The next morning, Lisa carefully folded the check and tucked it into her bag. Determined to thank Keanu in person and perhaps return the favor in some way, she made her way to the hospital. As she arrived, she hesitated at the entrance, her nerves getting the better of her. What if she wasn't allowed in? What if she wasn't welcome? Just as she was debating whether to turn back, a nurse passed by and stopped, giving her a kind, knowing smile. "You're Lisa, aren't you?" Lisa blinked, startled. "Eyes. How did you know?" The nurse chuckled softly. "He mentioned you," she said, tilting her head in the direction of the hall. "Come with me." Lisa followed her down a series of quiet, winding hallways until they reached a small, private room. Through the window on the door, she saw Keanu sitting by his sister's bedside. He held her hand gently, his head tilted toward her as he spoke in soft tones. His face was etched with worry, but there was tenderness in his expression, a deep love that couldn't be mistaken. The nurse opened the door slightly and gestured for Lisa to step inside. Keanu turned at the sound, his eyes widening in surprise. He rose to his feet immediately. "Lisa," he said, his voice a mixture of surprise and relief. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Lisa said quickly, her voice trembling. Before Keanu could respond, his sister's soft, cheerful voice broke the silence. "Is this her, Keanu?" Keanu nodded slowly, his gaze locked on Lisa. "Yeah," he said quietly. "This is her." Lisa took a tentative step closer, her heart racing as she looked at his sister. Her frail frame couldn't hide the warmth and strength that radiated from her presence. "Hi," Lisa said softly, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I'm Lisa. I've heard so much about you." His sister smiled warmly, her eyes sparkling despite the weariness in her features. "Thank you," she said, her voice gentle but sincere, "for taking care of my brother. He needs people like you." Lisa's chest tightened at the words. She glanced at Keanu, who gave her a small, reassuring smile. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath as the three of them shared an unspoken understanding, one born of kindness, resilience, and a shared appreciation for the connections that make life worth living. Lisa glanced at Keanu, her heart aching at the vulnerability in his expression. "I didn't do anything special," she said, her voice cracking with the weight of everything unsaid. Keanu shook his head gently. "You did more than you realize," he replied, his tone firm but full of gratitude. For the next hour, Lisa sat with them, quietly sharing stories, laughter, and the silence that spoke volumes. She learned about his sister's love for painting, how she painted their childhood memories, and the way she had fought fiercely against the illness that had already taken so much from her. As the evening wore on, Lisa felt a warmth she hadn't experienced in years, a deep sense of belonging and purpose that she hadn't known she'd been searching for. But as the time came to leave, Keanu walked her to the hallway. His expression was serious, the weight of everything they had shared still hanging between them. "Lisa," he said softly, his voice quiet but intense, "I don't think you realize how much you've changed my life." Lisa looked up at him, tears brimming in her eyes. "You've changed mine too." Keanu hesitated, as if carefully weighing his words. "I don't want this to be the last time we see each other." Her breath caught in her throat, but before she could say anything, he added, "It doesn't have to be." And for a moment, they stood there, neither of them wanting to say goodbye. Then, as if the universe had other plans, Keanu's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his face tightening. "It's the doctor," he said. Lisa nodded, stepping back to leave. Her voice was steady despite the ache in her chest. "Take care," she whispered, turning toward the door. As Keanu walked away, he stopped and turned back, locking eyes with her. "This isn't goodbye," he said firmly, and something in his gaze made Lisa's heart flutter with hope, even in the uncertainty. She stood there for a moment, her heart full of both hope and a tinge of sadness, as the door quietly closed behind him. The end. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness have the power to change lives in ways we never expect. Lisa and Keanu's connection was born from a simple, yet profound moment of empathy. In a world that often feels disconnected, they found each other through compassion, vulnerability, and shared humanity. The journey they began that cold night in Los Angeles was just the beginning of something far deeper, showing us that, even when we feel lost, kindness and hope can always light the way. So remember, no act of kindness is ever too small, and sometimes, the person you least expect is the one who needs it the most. Thank you for joining us on today's journey, and may you always find the courage to be the light in someone else's life, just as Lisa and Keanu did for each other. Kindly indicate your interest if you like to listen to these type of stories. Thank you, and God bless you.